Hello, give us 1 minute to set up. Thank you.
Hello, hello. Am I audible?
Yes, you heard.
Hello. I think
Let's
Chair
mute
isn't
that.
audible.
No, let's mute that.
Wait. Hello. Hello, hello. Am I
Hello.
audible?
Yes, you're audible.
All right. PI through chat. I'll be recording this week as well. So if you'll be raising a PI, it's in the recording. Sorry, my speech. 3, 2, 1. A woman is forced to conditions they do not control, but they are compared to people like Chris Aquino, who have succeeded. So great for them, but for the remaining 80%, they are left in a dire situation that they have no control over. Setup. Where does this debate take place first and foremost? This debate lies in places where state failure is rampant, given that the info slide explicitly states that the burden for women here is placed on uplifting impoverished and marginalized communities. That is quite clear. What then does the feminization of survival look like? This looks like women actively being forced to make up for the faults of the state, especially in times of massive setbacks for female populations. These female groups are likely there to fill in the gap because the state doesn't fill its end of the bargain. This looks like setting up community pantries in states where you cannot give people the sufficient bargaining power to get food. Note that this isn't inherently bad, right? But the problem lies on the delta. When you weigh the benefits over the harms, you necessarily place an excessively high burden on these feminist groups. This sensationalizes their plight further rather than attempting to address why there is even a problem in the first place. And when this happens, the state is rid of accountability and also sets up the women for failure, which we will argue later. In opposition, you do not solve the underlying problem. You throw money and gender quotas only to make things worse. What then does Gov therefore have to defend? We defend a world where we also have economic initiative programs. Note that this is true, since the point of fiat is that both sides have economic capital and political will to do this anyway. But the difference is our initiatives are not exclusionary. Op might say that this is the path to empower women by giving them a stepping stone. We have 3 preemptions to give this. 1, we are okay with trading off the immediate aid since we do not concede. Since we do concede that their solutions may happen faster, because we think that the more important question is where is aid more effectively, especially in marginalized communities where you only have very little room for failure. 2, we are also biting the bullet and say that sure, maybe some women don't get aid on our side because we think that just because opposition gives more women money on their side is already a sure win. We can prove that they set these women up for failure on their side later, then it doesn't matter if they give more money to women at all. 3, as we prove later, we think that these initiatives where you rely on the free market to balance these inequalities is not the best way to solve the problems that systems have created itself. Opposition later has to prove how we can trust the laissez-faire system that has doomed these women to begin with. What then are the standards for when we say that something has done more harm than good? 1, in terms of long-term economic development, where do we uplift the most number of marginalized people? And 2, in terms of sustainability, where do we best keep the momentum for women? Argument 1, it increases the pressure for women without solving the underlying problem. The feminization of survival is rooted in gender stereotypes that women must take care of their family above all else. Everything starts at home, like what happens in status quo, where women are framed as the caretakers of the family already. Like how you perceive the light of the family as the servant who takes care of children, relegating many of the domestic work on them, like washing the dishes or changing a baby's diaper in the middle of the night. Note that the problem here is that it dilutes their identity as mere caregivers, where you are subscribed as someone who is just relegated to these positions. This ultimately means that just because you give them an entrepreneurial chance means you take away the notions that you are still the primary agents to manage the house. They are still expected to cook the food, to iron the clothes, to wash the dishes and laundry. On the comparative and opposition bench, women are subscribed to these gender stereotypes. The problem here is very simple. You do not change the existing struggles of these women because they are left to carry the brunt of the problem. But at the same time, even when they do succeed, the success often tramples on the rest who are yet to do so. This is the median case. First, it is what leads to too much overwork for women. When you subscribe to this notion, it means you embrace both existing perceptions on women in addition to the feminization of survival. Right now, women are expected by society to cater to their children and do dishes, but at the same time, because of survival narratives to be the beacons of their family survival, they're often forced to work at home. What happens is a compounding of their struggles, which are consequences of their poverty and femininity, a harm that only doubly accrues on opposition bench. Second, you don't resolve the reason why women have it difficult in the first place. The pursuit for survival is rooted in the desire to alleviate poverty. You work 12 hours a day as a nurse in Kolkata because you want to ensure your family has something to eat, and when you get back home, you still have the decrepit living conditions. You still have education that's vastly inaccessible for your children because the schools are concentrated in New Delhi and Mumbai. Well, we agree that there is economic benefit to feminization because obviously you need something to make ends meet. You do not change the structures of society that force these conditions in the first place, which means you do get to feed your family for a day. Sure, great, but you never change the environment that led to hunger in the first place. What this means is it necessarily places women on a trajectory to failure. Women are trying harder and harder and harder again to uplift themselves out of poverty, but in reality, this can only be done so much to feed them for another day, but never give solvency to the root causes of poverty. Note that this exists in failed states where intergenerational poverty is not just a consequence of their womanhood, but also because of decrepit economic situations. Before I take the POI, why are they likely to fail as a result? One, the conditions never change. You still live in a destitute land in the middle of Azerbaijan. Two, the state doesn't change. The state is still oppressive to the worker rights of women. Three, their pursuit is always going to be less than 100% because the structures are inherently against them. Poverty is against you, femininity is against you, but the narrative never guarantees solvency to the most extent. We say that there are more harms by weighing because sure, you can get short-term goals to eat another meal, but there's still a never guarantee that your child won't suffer from Zika virus. Third, even if some women succeed in the very best case, this is still bad because this is ignorant to the plight of the majority of women. Those who succeed are only the lucky 5% who just happen to have the stars aligned for them. Great! Like getting a lucky day at work and getting promoted. For the vast majority of people, this doesn't exist. Two, these feature the crazy rich women like Chris Aquino, women already primed to succeed. Their conditions have been predetermined already. But because they are not in the same decrepit conditions as the impoverished women of Kolkata, they are given mass priority. POI. No POI?
Yeah, all the harms deposited are caused by the patriarchal society prove the exclusivity, while the nuance on feminization causes all the harms that you posited.
Very clearly, for the 80% who do not succeed on your bench, there's greater criticism for them because you place a higher burden and pressure on them because of the people who did succeed. What does this mean? Opposition has to defend a monolithic perspective on poverty alleviation. You place excessive emphasis on their femininity, but you don't address why poverty shackles them to the greatest extent. What is the comparative and positive material on our bench? You want poverty alleviation that's inclusive for all, to target everyone in the community and not just for women. The reason why all targeted solutions are exclusive on Gov is because it should be the focus that the info slide says, and opposition must accept the trade-off. A multifaceted solution is better on Gov because you make sure that poverty is addressed for the multifactorial nature that it is. You target the root cause and you place the burden and conditions rather than on them. In opposition, you set people up to fail, leading to abuse. Argument 2. The feminization of survival acts as a smokescreen for gender policies. You rely on free market for these gender problems, which disincentivizes the state to help women more. First, this is what the state uses to shift the blame on impoverished families. The blame is placed on women as a result. Second, this is also used by businesses to stop creating more gender equalizing policies. Like alternatives on our side look like creating safer spaces, promoting diversity forums and summits. These are better than your typical gender quota since you do not break the stereotype at all. This is a very clear proposition win.
Okay, thank you for that fine speech. Calling on this next speaker, you're here.
Hello. Before I proceed, would it be all right to be given a few minutes just to fix my notes? And I'll
That's
also
okay.
be preparing a timer. Thank you. Hello. So, hi. I'm Hugh Franco, he, him pronouns. Wait. Am I visible and audible?
Yeah, you're visible and audible.
All right, great. So, hi, Hugh Franco, he, him pronouns. We'll be taking POIs through voice, but please don't badger. Beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1. Start. The biggest case that you hear from opposition is on the worst example hinged on SQ, right? In status quo. So that they want to, their whole case was they're trying to deliberately pin women against each other. But we tell you coming from opposition that it's not a competition between these women, but it's a competition and a fight towards the patriarchy, in which this is the nuance that they deliberately try to dismiss, right? But absent, we also want to respond that absent of the narrative, women are still obligated to do a lot of things. But at least with this narrative existing, coming from our side, to prove why it's good than like harmful, for example, is while they're doing all of these things, there is this narrative of women empowered. They are empowered by their own by feminism, for example, or they are empowered because they are women and they want to try to fight against these harmful narratives that pins them down at the very end of the day. There are even platforms, for example, for women to feel empowered in our current society insofar as we are progressing. But also, we want their one of their arguments as well is that the conditions never change, that you place women in a trajectory of failure, that there's no solvency. But in this with all of these points, right, we think that these are minor harms compared to all the benefits that I'll be proving later on. They never prove the nuance of feminization. Note that society is inherently patriarchal. They never proved a counterfactual in the first place, in which we think from this even government already falls. But what are your standards in believing in something so that we make the setup clear coming from opposition? It's one, the standards of believing in something when it breeds or gives like individual benefits on the ground. This looks like women being able to have their basic like fundamental human rights. But second is society where the majority of these women, for example, not just in an individual level, but even including the entire genders, for example, are able to experience these, for example, benefits. But thirdly, on a timeline when it's sustainable to even the women in the future. Where does the feminization come from? To make it clear, it comes from trying to go against the patriarchal standards, right? The culture that promotes these power imbalance that naturally put women at the bottom, that there's a deprioritization of women's struggles, for example. But secondly, the clear lack of women participation in workplaces, for example, in legislation, right? That these are men jobs, for example, as what society tries to put it. But secondly, it also comes from the nuance of feminism in these struggles of survival, for example. But arguments then, why is the belief then of feminization of survival that has done more harm than good principally justified, right? Because it is justice to the marginalized women. What does this mean? This is justice to the women who have been marginalized in the past, for example, people who weren't able to vote, women who weren't able to vote, to be educated, women who had no place in legislation. The fact that it even trickled down to them not being able to enjoy and experience these very fundamental rights is justice to them, because the feminization of survival is a continuing fight and struggle to bridge the gaps between these gender gaps, right? It's justice to the past insofar as we've already given what is due to these women from the first place. And we're able to highlight the names of the women who fought in the past in order to gain the rights that we currently have as of today. But secondly, it's also justice to the present, that the women and the marginalized communities in the current, for example, because when you're feminizing the struggles, and this is me arguing on exclusivity, right? You're actively fighting the harms and those that are urgent that the women and other marginalized communities are experiencing as of today. So it's an active fight, for example, in which you don't coming from their side later on. But thirdly, it's justice to the future, because insofar as we have this intergenerational responsibility that the women of the future are able to experience the same benefits that we're able to do right now insofar as we act currently. But yes, I'll be taking the POI.
Your empowerment is not just a very simple claim of, oh, you empower it on your side. We have very clearly established on our side that your empowerment hinges on them being successful to begin with. You have to first answer what are the probability of success.
I'll be answering that later, right? So far that I'll be proving my impacts. But in it's all these discussions are important as an impact because you get urgent and tangible outcomes, exclusive because you get women empowerment on our side, which is a very weird POI, right? Because you try to talk about competition and like there are better women figures, for example, but we think that this isn't a harm in the very first place because this is literally women trying to be women for others. For example, these are women trying to like empower other women at the end of the day, because your characterization was very unfair because it's unlikely that women are going to compete with one another existing of the narrative, right? But we think that the narrative actually promotes camaraderie, for example, in which I'll prove later on. But you get urgent and tangible outcomes coming from side like opposition because you're actively trying to seek justice to
POI.
women who in our framing later, I already answered the POI, but are experiencing these inequalities that they have been fighting for so long, right? But in our model, when you're able to believe the benefits that you're able to see and acknowledge, for example, the value of women having presence, for example, legislation or other institutions that help other women, for example, is important and better valued at the end of the day. But as for my second discussions, you are trying to like mitigate the existing exploitative misogynist narratives because in society, as a structural reason, there are existing stigmas that pin women down each other, that you aren't able to do this because you aren't able to have a place in the very first place, or that it even undermines these very causes to try to reach the gender quotas. The implication of this discussion is that they're trying to like deprioritize women causes, for example, or the fight against women being marginalized at the end of the day. And also the stigma of women will be continued inside like of government insofar as they never proved a counterfactual in the very first place, and they never tried to actively like pursue in fighting for the women's rights, because insofar as they only prove the principle, for example, of competition and a very unfair characterization, right? Because on the converse discussion, you don't get tangible help or like assistance coming from side government insofar as you focus so much on the principle of competition, in which we already proved it's not a major harm or a tipping point, right? Because there are wider harms coming from opposition insofar as we already proved that there are like women struggling to beat the patriarchy insofar as their rights aren't being able to be heard, for example, or given to them in the very first place. Whereas on our side, it's important to have this narrative because we portray their fighting and contribution to be validated at the end of the day. And also, you have an optimistic narrative of fighting through survival. With all these reasons, we are proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you for that fine speech. Calling on the next speaker, here.
Can I be heard? Again, can I
Yep,
be
you're
heard?
audible and visible.
Thank you. POIs on the chat. I'll just record my speech. I'll drink water first. Again, POIs on the chat. I'll just get my timer. Pronounce hear him. The feminization of survival might be good in the short term, but it drastically harmed the feminist movement in the progress for the long term. And I think that is something that we shouldn't trade off, because these women deserve more. They deserve more than having money on their table. They deserve more of the change that they deserve, because of the fact that leader of opposition perfectly conceded that these women were so oppressed in status quo. The first thing I want to do is simply destroy leader of opposition within the debate. What did they say? The first thing that we heard from them is a race of POI. They say that the harm is not inherent within the feminization of survival. But this is clearly uncomparative within the debate because sexism will exist on both sides of the house. But this debate is about the extent. Given that sexism will exist on both sides, it is about where are these bigots much more powerful? Why then are these harms much more worse in the world of opposition? The first reason is that there's a strong messaging to blame women because the state can wash its hands of its responsibility and it can shift the blame and the responsibility onto the women. This is so harmful within status quo because poverty is not linear, but rather it is intergenerational and multifaceted in nature, meaning giving women 1,000 peso will not solve the root cause of the poverty alleviation nor the poverty intergeneration because of the fact that these problems are rooted into far more systematic problems like lack of opportunities, the poor quality of education, and so on. So therefore, opposition only tackles the surface level but do not address the root cause of the problem. And that is damning to their case because you pin women against each other because you set them for failure. Therefore, they don't have any solvency at all. The second thing I want to do is simply respond. They say that you get empowerment because of the money that you are able to give towards these women. The first thing I want to highlight is that this argument assumes that there's no empowerment that will happen under government side. But this is simply a lie. Look, June is very clear on the comparative. Do not let them gaslight you to think that we don't have any counterfactual. Our counterfactual is simply that the poverty alleviation must be for all and must be inclusive within the multifaceted nature of intergenerational poverty. That means that you are still able to open opportunities for women. You are able to still open opportunity for men. So therefore, our comparative is more holistic because we are able to give them more tools, for example, to access, because poverty is not only a one problem that is faced by one gender, but rather this is heavily ingrained within the society. But the second thing I want to highlight is that there are other facets as well of empowerment, like NGOs, for example, that are pro-women, like Angat Buhay. These things are also empowering because it validates women that they are not alone within this fight. So therefore, they need to prove the tipping point on why this empowerment is so special, especially considering that you're able to get it from other things as well. But thirdly, even if you get empowerment under opposition, that empowerment is highly conditional because you are only empowered under the rules under the house because you are reliant on external validation. So therefore, there are two scenarios that can happen. If they fail, which is most likely to happen in most cases, you are blamed for that failure. You are seen as a wasted opportunity because the state has wasted a lot of resources to you. Why then are they likely to fail under theirs at the house? Firstly, their policy are only address the surface level of the problem. You only give them money, but you do not address the root causes of it, like the social behavior of individuals. So therefore, they are still likely to fail. But secondly, these problems are already heavily ingrained within the constitution, for example, or within the culture of most of these conservative states. So therefore, you still have a lot of political pushbacks. But therefore, that just proves that there's a high bar for them to prove. The second is that even if they succeed, this is still terrible because those success stories are likely to be weaponized against other women. So therefore, if other women fail, you are gaslighted and you are likely to be self-blamed because they are able to use the success of other women as a reference point in order to silence you, in order to gaslight you that it's your problem and not a problem of the state. So therefore, their solution is much more harmful because we are able to flip it in very bad malicious intent. The last thing that they say is that we need justice for women. Firstly, this just assumes that we leave these women behind, but we won't help them. But that premise is simply a lie because we were very clear on the comparative because poverty alleviation are still able to benefit women on the ground. Like when you improve the quality of education, that is able to benefit women because they are able to receive better quality of education, things like that. So therefore, this justice principle is not mutually exclusive. But secondly, but moreover, if I am able to prove that this feminization of survival the feminization of survival has breed more harm than good, therefore there's no strong justice. This is not true. This is not a true form of justice, but rather this is a punishment for women if I am able to prove later that it brings more harm than good. The last thing that they say is that we don't pin women against each other, but this is simply a lie because under opposition we create a clear playing field for women to go against each other because there are only limited slots for that quota. There are only limited opportunity for that poverty alleviation because so that means that only selected women will be chosen. So therefore, if you fail, you are likely to be blamed by your entire community. So therefore, that is the reasons why they pin against women against each other because of the scarcity of resources that happens under their counterfactual. So extensions then, even in the best case of that women are able to succeed, this backtracks the progress of the feminist movement. The premise is quite simple. Under opposition, you decrease the propensity of the feminist movement to demand more progressive change, such as abortion, better pay leave, and so on. Under opposition, the feminization of survival is likely to be used as a scapegoat mechanism by the state in order to dilute accountability because now the state has a strong justification and ammunition to tell the public and moderates that we have already done our part, that these women are asking too much. So therefore, the feminization of survival might be good for the short term, but it is detrimental for the long term because of two mechanisms. Firstly, the feminist movement is forced to be shut up by the state because of the illusion of change that happens under opposition. But secondly, the moderns are likely to view the feminist movement in a negative light, in a point of which it demands more, because the populist rhetoric that comes from them is that these women are asking too much, for example, and we have already done our part. This is likely to be done by Duterte and Trump. Note that this rhetoric is likely to be powerful in order to silence women because the messaging is so effective given the exclusionary nature of the feminization of survival. In conclusion, this just proves that the feminization of labor is likely to hinder and stagnate the push for progressive change or for a more radical change because you demobilize women on the ground. POI. The comparative here is better because you do not create the illusion of pro-women policy. In so far, the messaging of poverty alleviation is for everyone. It is too generalized. So this means that moderates are likely to support the movement in a point of which they demand more under our side of the house because the incompetent state does not have any strong reference point to use against the movement, unlike what happens under opposition where you are able to gaslight them and silence them. What is the clear change that happens under our side of the house? Firstly, you get more public support because there's no smokescreen effect. People are able to sympathize for you more because of the visceral feeling of suffering of women. That empathy does not happen under opposition because of the short-term poverty alleviation that is used against the movement. So therefore, the comparative here is better because of two reasons. Firstly, in terms of duration, you get faster change because there are less political pushbacks. So it is easier for you to push for progressive pro-women policy. But secondly, even in the worst case, it's better because you get incremental change that are easily co-optable by politicians like anti-discrimination policy. In conclusion, therefore, you safeguard the momentum of the progression of the movement that makes it easier for them to demand for progressive change because you do not gaslight them with a 500 peso, for example. This is important because of two reasons. Firstly, there's no other alternatives for the long term. Short-term needs are able to be solved in other ways. Like you can have poverty alleviation that is for all. So women are still able to get money under our comparative. But the clear difference here is that there's no alternative for you to get the long-term change because it is ingrained within the constitution like abortion. But lastly, the long-term change impacts infinite quantity of women because the future women are more in quantity as compared to the present. So in quantity, we win this debate. For all of this reason, we prove that in the short term, it's detrimental, but moreover, we prove the long-term implication. It is significantly harder for you to get the change for women on both short-term and long-term. For all of this reason, we need to proceed. Thanks.
Okay, thank you for that fine speech. Just a reminder to please take POIs and to please be mindful of time. Calling on the next speaker, here.
Here. Just to ask, am I audible from this distance?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay. Just give me some time to set up my timer. Okay. Hi, my name's Nina. Pronouns she, her. POIs through voice, preferably on the 4th or 5th minute mark. Yeah. Starting my speech. Oh, hang on. Just stay on the floor. Can you get side, please? Thank you. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. Government falls because they argue on the worst example of status quo, negating progress that the feminist movement has made, or progressive leaders that people have worked so much for just to be elected in these positions, right? Leaders who fight for this equality of the standing of women in society. But secondly, all the analysis from PM down to DPM, and I bet down to WIP as well, because they can't bring new matter, are all hinged on futuristic harms with complete absence of retrospective weighing. This means that on side government, all we get are theories. Their harms are purely theoretical panel. But on weighing on side opposition, we have weighed to you the real benefits and pragmatics that this feminization has done, which I will be extending and proving more later on. But thirdly, all the benefits that they want can easily be co-opted, right? Because the counterfactual that we get from them is, oh, we want equality for all. But they fail to understand why the nuance on women are very important, because it's the women who are the marginalized, who are often left aside from society, because they also
POI.
right? The society is very patriarchal. I said fourth and fifth minute, but let's respond more, right, to a few things that government has said. Firstly, they tell us that women are forced and obliged again, right? They're obliged to uplift these communities to survival. We say that it's fine because, firstly, women have various obligations in the first place. Absent the feminization, women are still expected to care for their children or serve their husbands or work as twice to get an equal footing in society. This was clear as early as LO speech, right? This means that absent the feminization, women are still obliged and expected to do a lot of things. But on side opposition, even with these obligations existing, at least women are still empowered on our side. But government would say, right, that, oh, empowerment doesn't happen on your side because it's hinged on success. But in my third response later on, I will prove to you why this is untrue and why empowerment can still happen on our side. But secondly, they also tell us that society set these women up to fail. Firstly, government has to prove the true value of this, right? Because why would the society go through efforts such as initiatives and training, for example, for these women, only to set them up for failure in the future? But secondly, these efforts come from women supporting women as well. So it's unlikely that they are still subjected to the patriarchal society, because government has to take into account as well that a lot of these initiatives come from the feminist movement or from pure women initiatives who want to uplift other women as well. But thirdly, right, they
POI.
concede and they frame this comes from struggling societies. This means that the state has an incentive to educate their women because of the vast globalization happening, right? Because the Philippines, for example, sees US progressing so much because they let their women work, for example. So the Philippines has the incentive to educate and let their women work as well. But sure, before I proceed to my empowerment issue, POI.
So the problem is, it's not the women themselves that will other women to fail, but the point is, this is still contingent on success since these are microloans, which means your business has to succeed. It doesn't matter if other women support you or not. You have to prove solvency.
Yeah, I don't get why success is such a big harm on our side, right? Because you posit that, oh, empowerment and all this success is hinged upon the success of this woman as well. But retrospectively, right, we have seen women getting empowered just because of success stories. We have seen women who kept asking more because they have seen other women who has more as well. I think that success isn't an end game and like an end it be all for this motion, right? Sure, success is nice, but we have to ask ourselves, panel, and we have to start somewhere. We need a starting point, and this is what feminization does. We don't assure you that the moment you subscribe to feminization, you get success immediately, but we assure you that the moment you get feminized or these initiatives happen, you get empowered. And this leads me right perfectly to my third response, right? Because they said that empowerment is hinged on success. This is untrue because sense of empowerment is always subjective, panel. The main tipping point is that government wants to protect so much the possible 80% of women who might have imposter syndrome, right? And doubt that, oh, Chris Aquino achieved so much and I didn't. But aside from this being a weird example, because Chris Aquino doesn't need survival because she was born in a privileged family, it's also because the harms on government side are purely theoretical. This means that because empowerment is subjective, empowerment for me isn't always hinged on success. It can be empowerment by actually seeing my community or my barangay, for example, including me in the initiatives that they have for women like me who are left off by society. But the fourth response is that on how they blame women and weaponize success stories, right? This is untrue, because how will you blame women if they aren't put into position that you can blame in the first place? Because they concede, right, that women in these societies still don't hold high positions, they still don't hold so much power. So like the likelihood of the society blaming women for jobs or just attending these seminars and orientations is very funny and unlikely. But on weaponizing success stories, this is sad because coming from government, this is sad coming from government because retrospectively we see that this is untrue, right? Because we have seen how the feminist movements and the narratives that they have created help women so much. But let me extend further, right? We'd even argue that its justice served women who are victims of the patriarchal society. This means that when we look at the info slide that says that women are the primary target participants of poverty alleviation initiatives, this is because microfinance is a field predominantly known as an arena for man only. So women are stripped off the chance to learn in these areas. And this is why feminization is important, because now we include women in these discussions. We give them the chance to learn from this so that they can apply in fields concerning these aspects as well. This looks like initiatives starting in barangay levels, for example, holding seminars, workshops, and even opening up slots for jobs for the marginalized. But they tell us, right, that it's a competition event because a few slots will only open for these women. But let's weigh, right, because this is a weighing debate. On weighing, I think it's more important, or it's less harmful to have less slots open than inside government where you have no slots open for women at all. But lastly, right, on my even if survival now becomes dependent on women, it's fine, because women in the domestic aspect taking care of their children, in the working class striving to get employed in this patriarchal society, or housewives who aren't able to get employed because of the patriarchal society are still expected of these things. But inside opposition, they get a first step, they get empowerment, and they start somewhere. For all these reasons, proud to oppose.
Okay, thank you for that speech. Calling on next speaker, here.
Hello, you guys should chat. I'm sure I'm both visible and audible.
Yeah, you're visible enough.
I'll start in a few. I'll just make sure everything's in order. The case on OP has been crystal clear. We told you that when you don't resolve the underlying problems that these women face, even if you throw them money, even if you throw them gender quotas, that's precisely how you get more harm than good. Majority of the speech of both Abed and June tells you that even if some women succeed, we don't think it's better for the vast majority in the median case of women who are in impoverished settings. We think that we have been most charitable in this debate. Meanwhile, opposition never talked about why it's bad or why it's okay to trade off some women failing and giving them high expectations. We think it's too late to build that at WIP. Given that the motion is about comparing why it has more harm than good, and they didn't even talk about why the harm is suddenly outweighed by their good, we think this is an automatic proposition. Two clarifications. Firstly, they accuse us of being futuristic and not being retrospective. Firstly, it's not that this House regress motion anyway. But secondly, more importantly, I think the average intelligent voter recognizes that all of the premises that June and Habit has been telling you are things of the past already, given that these are structural mechanisms that forces women into failure at the end of the day. It's very intuitive for you to see that these are not things that happen in the future. We already know how women fail in microfinance necessarily because there are still multiple underlying reasons, like June tells you, that they are still forced to work at home, that they are overworked and therefore cannot focus, and means that you're setting them up for failure because you still don't break all the other problems that the gender bias has created. It's a lie for you to say it's futuristic as if you don't know it's already been happening today. Second, we think that the alternative on our side is clear. We don't remove feminism in its sense, but we remove its push to force women into being the agents of uplifting their impoverished stature. Feminism still exists on our side. Other provisions and other government programs to help impoverished nations in communities still exist on our side. The difference is we prefer a much more inclusive approach at the trade-off of some women not receiving it in the short term because we think that's okay. Two major issues. Firstly, on the principle with the sub-issue on like the point of success, and secondly on pragmatics, which we think matters more. The first is on principle. The first claim that they had is to say that this is justice for the women of the past, present, and future. The first, there are multiple responses to this. The first response is to say that this lacks nuance. Like, where is the visceral harm that they're actually painting when you have this sort of principle being violated or whatever? Like, I don't really get what's the structural push from here. Again, we also have opportunities on our side. They have to prove to you why the delta is so necessary that you focus on women alone and pushing them the burden of like, putting their families out of this impoverished state necessarily is what the principled victory is so big. They didn't tell you that. So I don't get it, the nuance. Second, we argue on the magnitude of harms. So, okay, fine, let's give them the benefit of the doubt that for some reason, this principle of like having this opportunity to begin with, even if it's so lopsided to begin with, is something that they value. We tell you why it's very bad on their side, given that on their side, they think that the damage comes from within the self, right? Because justice or whatever, it's very theoretical. Compared to our side, the magnitude is very, very real. When other people see you fail necessarily, that's how you essentially become much more pressured. That's how the government sees you as a failure. That's how the government can weaponize the statements into using other things so that you don't get progressive policies. So they have a very theoretical harm of justice. Our harm is very real and it's much more happening, something that is much more important for the feminist movement and for the average intelligent voter as a whole. But thirdly, we argue that this is hinged on success. What are the responses to this? Because I think this is the only point that they engage with satisfactorily. They say that why would we make women fail to begin with? I told you the POI, that's not the point. These are microloans and investments. It doesn't matter if your other women support you or not. If your businesses fail, that's precisely how you get criticized by the state. That's precisely how you lose out on the opportunity given to you. That's precisely how you lose out on other people believing that women can be successful, even if they don't understand that just because you throw money at them doesn't automatically mean they succeed. The nuance of that is gone for a lot of the people who don't understand the systematic problems of gender. What they will see is that, oh, I didn't get my pension as a man. I didn't get my provisions from the government as a guy. It was only given to the opportunities for the women. When they fail, I will be angry at them. This is what Abed and June has been telling you at first and second, and that's precisely the delta on why success is important. But how did they resolve this? They tried to build a deputy that, oh, we can educate these women, right, and whatnot. Like as if these policies didn't exist already in status quo. We've already seen how much failure it has happened, necessarily because this is just too systematic of a problem that targeting one facet automatically doesn't resolve a lot of the other things. We think it's a big burden for you, panel, to buy that this is a true case. We don't think that the likelihood is there. So, in terms of principle, aside from their principle not being too relevant, even if we engage in the fact that it's somehow hinge on success or whatever, we don't think that it's still much more important than what we bring. Comparative on our side, we told you why poverty is a multifaceted problem coming from Abed and June, and therefore the solution is also multifaceted in approach. That it's okay if you do not give women first, like all the priority. It's okay if you give both men and women necessarily because poverty is something that cuts across genders, no matter who you are. So in terms of principle, they never deal with our push on why it's inconsistent. But second, and more importantly, let's go to the pragmatics, right? We talked to you about two things on our side. Firstly, as where the point these women fail. And we gave you multiple reasons why they fail. There's the systematic problems, there's still high expectations to do with the household, there's still multiple reasons why people still discriminate them at the end of the day, which means they most likely fail. And given they also, concede that, patriarchy still exists, automatically they have to concede that the 80% of women or 90% of women have to fail given that they're in impoverished settings. But before I move on as to why we win, even if we talk about women who succeed, POI. No POI. Second, in the case of why they succeed, we give you three reasons right away, right? Firstly, even if some women succeed, you necessarily have the state who have perverse incentive to weaponize this and wash their hands necessarily, to wash their guilt and say that, oh, the free market can resolve it anyway. The state will not just take accountability at all. They say that, oh, on their side, the only response is like, oh, why would you blame women who fail anyway if they're already not good positions? We tell you, like, yeah, sure, maybe not us, but for a lot of people, i.e., the man who is probably didn't understand the nuance of why this project was launched to begin with, they are going to be angry in society because they don't get the nuance of this, and they're going to pin the blame on the women rather than on the state. But secondly, even if we succeed, right, we tell you there's internal questioning coming on your side of the house. Like for 80% and 90% of women, if they look at that 5% and 10% success story, they're questioning themselves if they are worthy to begin with, if they're worthy of like being given this provision, if they're actually worthy of actually receiving help at the end of the day, when they don't understand that it's not going to succeed necessarily because there are too many structural problems that prevent them from doing so. Comparative on their side, they say that, oh, we deal with stigma. The problem is there's huge turn back on their side. You don't deal with stigma when a lot of women fail and people are angry that they are failing. We think quite clearly our harms are much more visceral, much more realistic, and much more urgent compared to whatever stigma dealing they choose to deal with. Go.
Okay, thank you for that fine speech. Calling on the next speaker. Here.
Hi, am I audible?
Yes, you're heard.
All right. Let me just set up my timer and yeah. Hi, Marvin. POI's 4th minute mark. Pronouns he, him. Cool. Just setting up my timer. Starting my speech in 3, 2, 1. The prerequisite discussion in this debate is that the reason why feminization of survival exists in the first place is that state provision has been unfair, has been run by a patriarchal system. The whole idea of feminism is not forcing women to act, rather, it's to value the spirit of women acting. It's to value the spirit of women trying to survive from the conditions that state and patriarchy has subjected them to. Responses then. The main battle cry of government was that women are forced to be obliged to uplift themselves and fix the state's lacking. Assuming then that this is true, we argue to you that it's fine because survival is never conditioned on gender in the first place. If you give responsibilities for these women, that's good because they are given a chance to be part of the discourse, to be part of the conversation. As an elevated response, then, the challenge on status quo is when we generalize that aid and alleviation, it lacks equitable and universal distribution, especially to the women on the ground. We argue to you that probably the opportunities given is heavily focused for men because state expectation is men are better at handling money and finance. Men are better at jobs. So on a timeline, what happens then on government side is not only do you make women reliant on the provisions of what man can do, but it also creates a disproportionate provision of aid where minorities such as single women are given lesser chances to alleviate themselves, where these single women are also forced to compete with man when the conditions of society is heavily patriarchal. As my LO has said, the reason why this narrative exists in the first place is because state provision has been disproportionate in the first place. Why is that response true? It's true because it basically paints the narrative that government has been arguing on a futuristic perspective and does not weigh the retrospective
POI.
and good. They said 4th minute. This response is important because this calls out the main principle of government's case, which means that all of their arguments hinge on that principle is irrelevant. And the second response comes that when government argues that the survival is hinged on the success of these women, citing on the success of their microloans and of their businesses and whatnot, we argue to you that even if it's true, it's fine because the presence of them taking the chances to survive exists on our side. So it's fine if they fail because they were empowered to try in the first place. By converse from government side, probably that initiative for women to try is scary. So we do not get women trying at all. We do not get women taking the initiatives, taking the opportunities. Now we see on government side why women become over reliant to their husbands and men in marginalized communities. Now we see why businesses ran by men are more preferred and more collaborated with because of the stigma that men do it better. If the harm then is that women will compete with each other, it's fine because that competition is focus on the women themselves rather than them having to be forced to compete with women, which is a disproportionate competition for themselves. If your problem is competition itself, we've argued to you that competition will always exist and will always be equally existing on both sides of the world because that reaps out the best of the best in the first place. It's a concept of empowerment because these women are trying to strive for their survival. That competition exists regardless. But before I proceed to my issues, go. POI.
So you cannot ignore the harms by saying it's okay at least they tried, because failure also impacts future political will for legislation. If the microloans for women only led to debt that is weaponized against them to push for anti-women rhetoric, why is it still okay even if it breeds more harm than good in the legal sense?
Then that means that you have been debating on the worst example of status quo. Because if you already have heard from BPM, she has told you that states incorporation has to also include women. If you live in status quo now, you see that these initiatives also target women because the prerequisite discussion again is that those provisions are not fair and has been disproportionate. States' interest and responsibility then is to ensure that these women succeed in the first place and to ensure that their systems of providing this aid does not accommodate only heavily to men. So we do not get a prerequisite discussion even from your side how that is true. Principle issues then, right? Because we have to tackle case at hand the principled and pragmatic issue of this debate. It's simple. We just have to discuss why this has done more good than harm. Only from upside do you hear the value of feminization of survival. Franco has told you that the prerequisite discussion as to why this narrative itself is justice to the marginalized women, past, present, and future. And my DLO has even extended to you that this justice to marginalized women who are victims of the patriarchal society is justified. When we look at the societal good this has done, we argue to you that as a prerequisite discussion, women has to do more legwork in order to survive compared to men because of the conditions that history has placed these women. Nuancing survival to feminism not only obliges and encourages women to uplift themselves, but rather it's also the value of its ability to empower women that in this patriarchal society they can survive and uplift themselves, that there are opportunities waiting for them, that even as a woman, you are convinced of the ability to uplift and survive. We argue to you that this is important because of the benefit. This benefit in itself is important because the narrative of empowerment is only existent on our side. The empowerment trickles down itself to individual women. The converse from Gov is that what this empowerment hinges on was the success of these women, right? Firstly, even if that was true, it's fine because at least on our side, women are valuing also the chances to survive, either to survive even if they fail or if they succeed. That in itself is a form of women empowerment. But we further argue to you that the likelihood of women failing in the first place was because aid and alleviation has undermined them, because aid and survival was generalized on provision, because there is lacking value for women's roles in uplifting themselves in the first place. We argue to you on the individual level that this gives hope for women to not give up and be reliant on their husbands, on their male breadwinners, that they can contribute as well. Because what happens on government side is that the narrative that male patriarchal heads of families are the best people that can uplift themselves and women should just stay at home and wait for the food to arrive, that in itself is bad. Because survival, as again, is not conditioned to gender. The pursuit to alleviate poverty is not a gender-centric movement. We argue to you that the reason why women are expected to stay home in the first place is because the conditions of aid and alleviation is only expected to be accessed by men. The last thing I want you to remember in this debate is that we are already by weighing debate winning because we have proven to you that even if those harms exist, it does not outweigh the goods that it has done retrospectively and for the future. One thing that we have to know for sure is that people and society in itself has the ability to fend and uplift themselves regardless of gender. Proud to win this debate.
Okay, thank you for that fine speech. Calling on the opposition reply speaker.
Hello. Before I proceed, am I audible and visible?
Loud and clear.
Great. So let me just prepare my timer. Okay. Oh. Beginning my speech in 3, 2, 1, start. Women empowerment is not characterized by competition and pinning other women down. Women empowerment is not characterized in a reduced, isolated success stories and making other women feel insecure about these isolated success stories. And women empowerment is also not an obligatory force for women to try to survive in a world of patriarchal standards, right? But women empowerment is literally women trying to fight against the patriarchy. Women empowerment is literally trying to empower other women, for example. And we think this is a characterization that government failed or even like dismissed, for example. And this, as a meta response, or why this introduction is important, is because this is the literal nuance of what women empowerment is in a feminism motion, right? In which they never really understood. And this is where their framing also falls, because they weren't able to understand that very nuance of women empowerment insofar as they try to reduce it to like competition and so what, so what. But what is the most contentious issue here in this debate? It is where you're able to beat the patriarchal standards and able to effectively achieve women's goals in a feminism motion. And secondly, on weighing, where do you get more harm or where do you get more good, for example, when feminizing the survival? Let's attack the framing firstly. They attack how the feminization of survival looks like, one, pitting women against each other insofar as there are like limited slots, for example, in these jobs or like in opportunities. But secondly, that we force women to be obligated in being in the front lines of survival. Response: what's the likelihood that women are going to be competing against each other? Because I think this is such a weird point insofar as we already proved this from first speaker down to third speaker, right? Insofar as they keep proving that they're fighting against the insofar as we keep trying to prove insofar as they try to prove that they are also fighting against the patriarchy and feminism still exists on their side. But do you see Mother Teresa trying to compete with, I don't know, Catriona Gray? Because I don't think it's true that with feminization it breeds competition against women and it pressures those less successful women at the end of the day. But Nina engaged beautifully as a feminist herself, because these success stories do not breed insecurity but it inspires other women, right? But secondly, these fights and success are not hinged on a greedy, selfish framing that government tries to fight for example, but it's literally that the fight is the cause for other women who are marginalized, right? That's why feminization exists in the very first place, because that's literally the spirit of the motion. As a meta, this is an unfair framing to literally fit all their arguments to be valid, when in fact their foundation is unfair and unrealistic in the first place, insofar as this isn't feminism or the essence of feminism or the goals of feminism. That's literally the spirit of the motion. And they never prove the likelihood and the competition and insecurities, which are all weird and lacks middle analysis. But we also engaged that insofar as they compete with one another or let people feel insecure, we tell you that it's okay because competition will always exist. And you heard this from Nina, right? That it incentivizes women more, for example. It's a special competition. That's why the burden is such a huge harm, when the harms that we question why their burdens or their harms are so harmful, right? Because the harms that are currently existing here in society are outweighing those harms that we try to prove. That women not having their fundamental basic right, that are misogynistic standards and narratives existing, that deprioritizes these very struggles that women are facing, and issues like abortion and other related issues are deprioritized. They argue that we have no solvency on our side, but it was clear from us that you're able to have this only in feminizing, for example, because these are all issues that directly like attack or address these issues that are prominently happening. That there's an imbalance here in their side is exactly in their count. That's why their counterfactual exactly doesn't work, because it's a problem solution mismatch. Because you try to co-opt our benefits, that you are also able to prioritize women insofar as you have like this universal inclusive policy. But we question, what's the feasibility? We have been fighting for inclusivity for so long, right? But you still see no tangible like outcomes. That's why the nuance is important, because on content and contribution, we already told you that we get direct like tangible action towards these issues insofar as it's an explicit aggression, for example, that you characterize the problem for it to be women problems, for example, because inclusiveness is so broad in their side. This is why we win, because we talked about justice, hope, that it directly addresses the inequalities, for example, that governments also inclusive model tries to talk about, but also the necessity of feminization in survival.
Okay, thank you for that fine speech. Calling on Governor reply. Here.
Oops. Hello, hello. Can I be heard? Hello.
Yep, we can hear you.
Audible, visible. We use another laptop because my partner's laptop got disconnected. I hope it's still audible. Starting my future in a while. 3, 2, 1. We proved on Gov that women's struggles are multifactorial. You're not just suffering because of womanhood, but also because you're poor. Panel, for you to give opposition the win in this debate, you must accept a few things. Either you accept that the principle of empowerment is more important than avoiding the harms of failing and losing out on development opportunities. Either you accept that the 5 to 10% success of women at the expense of the 90% being blamed is worth it, or either you accept that the success of others is worth the loss of political will to provide more systematic and sustainable solutions, since they can wash their hand at the get-go. Op failed on all 3 burdens. First, Op's main case is to say that, oh, patriarchy is bad. Sure, whatever you say. Like, I don't think any ordinary intelligent voter here will disagree with you. What opposition needed to prove was why the nuance of patriarchy is inherently going to help their case. Their entire case is to weigh this over poverty is just flawed. We told you at Prime that poverty and feminism is multifactorial. We proved that they are punished already at the household when they need to take care of children, but they are doubly punished all the more because you're now expected to work. DLO says that women will not fail because, oh, women will help other women. This is symmetric. It is better since we don't impose high expectations on Gov that are unrealistic. So the environment is just much healthier since there is no pressure against women. But also in response to what they say on globalization, we agree that it exists, but we point out the problem is societal. It's ingrained in the constitution and the culture. So even if there is globalization, it does not change for Duterte being sexist at the get-go. DLO then says, women are empowered. Note that they never proved this. We can live in a theoretical journal paper on Elsevier, but they never prove how empowerment can be tangible. But assuming that they did prove this well, which they didn't, by the way. First, DLO's case on success stories doesn't stand. This is not exclusive because success stories of women exist outside feminization of survival. And even if you don't buy this, seeing these stories place expectations on you because you read yourself, meaning you internalize it to yourself that you must follow through because if you don't, you are less and a failure too. DLO says that success isn't subjective, which we responded to quite well from Abed and Theo. Internally, this is a lie because if they are reliant on success stories by other women, you benchmark your expectation on what you know, and externally, this is a lie because your community is reliant on you saving them. Therefore, there is a strong external pressure from your neighbors and your family to succeed. Conclusion, even if you want to have subjective success, you are forced to subscribe to societal standards at the get-go. Upweb tries to salvage their case, saying, at least they try. Note how this is a clear misrep of our comparative from Prime. That's just bad debating. If their mechanism is to say that we empower women since they have cash, that also exists in our comparative because this gives money for all. So women can still receive money. We flip this at Abed on opposition. Women are more scared to try since the focus of backlash is concentrated, which is a visceral feeling that traumatizes women to try in the first place. Then they say on Op, hey, these policies are from the feminist movement. So we flagged early at Abed that this is out of the debate. These pro-women NGOs will still give them aid. You win debates by Delta, and the Delta in this debate is about state resources for poverty alleviation. The dying breath of DLO is to say, These industries are male dominated, so you need representation. Note that this is contingent success that was never proven. If it is a failure, it creates a lot of pushbacks. The failure is used to justify to let women to be housewives, which happens as status quo. And even if it wasn't, this is still symmetric because we will try to challenge it on both sides. This debate is about which solution is much better. Op never weighs this to the best extent. What do we give you at Gov? Our solution is better because it's not a lone fight. You have your community to back you up. Your policies are much more nuanced and targeted. It's not just simply giving resources to women, but addressing the root causes of the problem. Why is this then exclusive on Gov? Under opposition, there is just a focus, meaning opposition needs to take the trade-off. LO's shining knight in our armor is to say that the harms will still accrue on both sides. At best, it's just mitigation. And to win debates, you need to prove the delta. The same way we prove the delta of the harms. So what we get from Gov were quite beautiful. One, you prove that the baseline harm of expectations on women is symmetric, but the compounding effect is the problem too. Because of the narrative, you subscribe to what the state wants, which is to be rid of accountability, which opposition doesn't respond to. LO says that there's a timeline for feminization. They say it trumps on male-dominated jobs, but as an ordinary intelligent voter, I don't think that I buy that feminization of survival gave solvency at all. You still have wage pay gaps in a lot of countries where men are paid significantly more. But if this were true, women should have reached solvency already. But even the most developed of states like Norway still have a gender pay gap. This is a clear Gov win. We are advancing to the octofinals.